Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So today we'll discuss about sampling distributions, and you'll see in subsequent lectures how these sampling distributions are very important for inferential statistics. So in this we'll talk about what would be the distributions of sample statistics, and also we'll learn about the most important theorem in probability and statistics known as the central limit theorem. Now, as we have previously discussed, that statistical inference is concerned with making decisions about a population based on the information contained in a random sample from that population. For instance, like when we go to supermarkets, we get lot of food packets. Let's say you can consider a packet of milk of, let's say, 500 milliliter. Okay, and you may be interested in the mean fill volume of a pack of milk. Okay, so sometimes it might happen that the particular milk manufacturer company that may get complaints that you are getting the content of milk is less than whatever it's written on the cover, right? Many a times it happens. Normally we don't bother about, but time to time the analyzers check if the fill volume, whatever it's written on the packet, is actually, let's say, 500 milliliter or not. So what is generally done, that an analyst would take a random sample of, let's say, 50 or 100 packets and computes the sample average fill volume. Okay, so let's say the analyst collects 100 packets of milk from that very particular let's say manufacturer, and measures the content and computes the sample average fill volume, and let us suppose that it comes out to be 498 milliliters, although it's written 500 milliliter. But it might happen that in some packet we have a little bit of more, and in some packet we have a little bit of less. It's not exactly accurate. Okay, so the analyst, if it is like, let's say, 498 milliliters, the analyst will probably decide that the population mean is actually 500 milliliter, even though the sample mean was 498 milliliters, because he or she knows that the sample mean is a reasonable estimate of the population mean, and that a sample mean of 498 milliliter is very likely to occur even if the true population mean is, let's say, 500 milliliter. So in fact, if the true mean is 500 milliliter, test of like 100 packets made repeatedly, perhaps every half an hour, would produce values of fill volume that would vary above and below 500 milliliters. Okay, so each numerical value in the data is the observed value of a random variable. Okay, furthermore, the random variable are usually assumed to be independent and identically distributed. Then these random variables are known as random sample. Okay, so let us define formally what is a random sample. So the random variables, let's say x1, x2, xn, are a random sample of size n if all the xi's are independent random variables and every xi has the same probability distribution, like they are drawn from the same population. So then we call it as a random sample, and normally all the studies what we do about the population is based on the random sample, and the assumption of a random sample is extremely important, because if the sample is not random and it is biased or it is flawed in some other way, then whatever statistical methods which we are implementing or which we'll learn will not work properly and may lead to incorrect decisions. So the primary purpose in taking a random sample is to obtain information about the unknown population parameters. For example, we wish to reach a conclusion about the proportion of people in India who prefer to wear handloom clothes over the mechanized ones. So let P represent the unknown value of this proportion. So it is impractical to go to every individual and question that whether you are wearing a handloom, whether you prefer handloom clothes or you prefer the mechanized ones. Okay, so to make an inference regarding the true population proportion, a more reasonable procedure would be to select a random sample of an appropriate size, because size is very important, and use the observed proportion of the people in this sample to estimate estimate the same about the population. Okay, so the sample proportion is computed by dividing the number of individuals in a sample, let's say, who prefer handloom, by the total sample size. So then this P is a function of the observed values in the random sample. So because many random samples are possible from a population, it depends upon how you select how you do your sampling. The value of, let's say, this P will vary from sample to sample. So then this P becomes a random variable. So such a random variable is called a statistic, as we had previously also discussed. So a statistic can be any function of the observations in the random sample. So it can be your sample proportion, it can be your sample mean, it can be your sample variance. So all these things which can be a function of the observations in a random sample are known as sample statistics. Okay, and we have encountered statistics before. We discussed about sample mean, sample variance, sample standard deviation. And since it is a random variable, because your random samples might differ, and hence the value of statistic would also differ. So all this statistic which you obtain from the sample is also a random variable, and hence it has a probability distribution. So that probability distribution is called the sampling distribution. So the probability distribution of a statistic is called a sampling distribution. Okay, and one of the most famous sampling distribution is the distribution of the sample mean, because in many cases we try to estimate the, let's say, central tendency of the population by means of sample mean. We have seen that it is a good estimator of the population mean. So that distribution of sample mean also plays a very important role. Okay, and it's one of the one of the way to study about the population mean. And the sampling distribution of a statistic depends on the distribution of the population, the size of the sample, and the method of sample selection. Okay, so let there be a sample of size n taken from a normal population. Most of the times in this course we'll assume a normal population, so that the estimation of probability and everything become easier. And we'll see that by virtue of central limit theorem, you'll see that even if you choose it from a random unknown population, if your size is good, if your size is large, then you'll see that most of the times your sample mean distribution would tend to be a standard normal distribution. Okay. Suppose that a random sample of size n is taken from a normal population which has a mean mu and variance sigma square. So now each observation in this sample, let's say x1, x2, xn, you can say that they are normally distributed and independently distributed, and all these variables x1 and x2, they are random variables with mean mu and variance sigma square. Okay, so then you can define the sample mean as sum over these random variables divided by the sample size. So you can see that the numerator is a sum of the random variables which you have selected in the random sample. And we know that the linear functions of independent normally distributed random variables are also normally distributed. This is a property which we studied when we discussed about normal distributions. Therefore, the distribution of the sample mean will have a normal distribution, right? So this comes from the property of the normal distribution. Now, mean of such a distribution would be very easy to calculate. So mean is nothing but the expected value of the random variable. Here your random variable is your statistic, which is the sample mean. So the expectation value of x bar, which is normally used for sample mean, is simply you just calculate some expected value of the sum of all the random variables, and you know that mu1, mu2 and everything they equals mu because they come from the same population, and hence the mean of expected value of the sample mean is mu. Similarly, you can also compute the variance, and if you compute it comes out to be sigma square by n. So what you see that if you draw a sample from a normal population, and if you want to have a distribution of the sample means, so this is for a single sample. Similarly, you can draw many samples, and if you want to see that how the sample mean is distributed, which would be your sampling distribution of the sample mean, you'll see that if it is drawn from a normal population, the expected value of the sample mean is the population mean, whereas its variance is 1 by n times the population variance. So let's see that this is what it is shown in the figure. So it shows the distribution of sample mean from a normal population for different sample sizes. You can see that the mean for all this distribution is 0 because I think so it's a standard normal variable. And you see as you increase the sample size, you see that the variance or the dispersion or the variability in the data decreases. And it is expected because if you are increasing the sample size, you are including more and more members of the population, and hence your distribution is more close to so therefore the distribution of the sample mean is more close with mean at the population mean, and the variance tends to decrease. So it is always advisable to draw large size samples so that your variances or your standard deviation in the data is quite low. Now let's discuss about the most important theorems in statistics and probability, and this is called the central limit theorem. So the statement is as follows. So if x1, x2 and xn be a sequence of independent and identically distributed random variables, each having mean mu and finite variance sigma square, then for large n, please stress it is for large n, the distribution of sum of these random variables is approximately normal with mean n mu and variance n sigma square. So if it is from a normal population, so the distribution of the sum is exactly a normal distribution. However, it is not mentioned that whether you are drawing this sample from a normal population or not. So if you draw from any other population with mean mu and finite variance, then the distribution of the sum of these random variables is approximately normal with mean n times mu and variance n times sigma square. So we can say that, and it follows from the central limit theorem that if the sum of these random variables is normal distribution, then we can always standardize into a standard normal distribution, and you all know how to do it. So you just subtract the mean from the sum, and we know that the mean as per this theorem is n mu. So x1 plus x2 xn minus n mu, and if you scale it by the standard deviation, which is sigma times root n, would be approximately a standard normal random variable. And if you scale the sum by n, you will get the sample mean. So you can also state that x bar minus mu by sigma by root over n would follow a standard normal distribution, provided that your n tends to infinity, or let's say n acquires large values. And this is the reason why we see most of the times the distributions to be of bell shaped in nature. So if you are sampling from a population that has an unknown probability distribution, the sampling distribution of the sample mean will still be approximately normal with mean mu and variance sigma square by n if the sample size n is large. This is one of the most useful theorems in statistics and is called the central limit theorem. And this is one of the figures where you can see that you can start from a random distribution, let's say, which is not normal, and as you start increasing the sample size, it's shown for 1, 2, 3, 4, and as the sample size becomes more and more, you will see that the distribution really turns out to be approximately Gaussian or normal in nature. You can see that it starts to become normal around, around 2022. You can see that the nature starts to be coming normal, but as you typically increase the sample size, so therefore I told, as you increase the value of n, it becomes approximately normal in nature. And here in this case, we didn't start with a normal distribution. Here it's an unknown population distribution, but as you increase the sample size, you see that the distribution of the mean, sample mean, turns to be approximately normal. Now the proof of the central limit theorem is tricky, and there are many ways to see that. Here we'll try to see a very simpler way of visualizing central limit theorem by means of moment generating function. This is not a very generalized proof, but at least we can see why this theorem holds. So I would repeat once again, this theorem says that for any distribution x with a finite mean mu and variance, let's say sigma square, the sample sum s, let's say it's denoted by capital S, and also the sample mean x bar, okay, approach a normal distribution as n tends to very large values. And more specifically, we can convert the sample sum to the standardized sample sum and the sample mean to the standardized sample mean, and then the distribution of this standardized sample sum and the standardized sample mean approach a standard normal distribution. So let us consider a distribution of random variable x. It's an unknown distribution. We are not assuming a normal distribution here, with mean mu and variance sigma square, and let x1, x2, xn be a sample from this distribution. And let us define the sum Sn to be x1 plus x2 plus x3 and so on till xn. So we have to show that the standardized sum is that you subtract the mean of such a distribution, let's say n mu. That's what central limit theorem says, that the distribution of this sum of the sample S would be approximately normal with mu n mu, and the standard deviation is sigma times root over n. So you can show that the standardized sum, which will denote by Sn star, where Sn star is Sn minus n mu divided by sigma times root over n, approaches a standard normal distribution as n tends to infinity. We have to show this. Okay, this is the statement of the central limit theorem, and we have to show that the statement is valid for large values of n. And the approach would be, we'll show that the moment generating function of this standardized sum approaches the moment generating function of a standard normal variable for large values of n. And we know that by uniqueness of this moment generating function, we can show that both have the same distribution. So if we can show this, the moment generating function of this standardized sum is equal or approaches the moment generating function of a standard normal variable, then we can say that the distribution of Sn star is essentially standard normal variable. Okay, so and we know that the moment generating function is a very clever way of organizing all the moments into one mathematical object, and that mathematical object is called the moment generating function. So, and this is denoted by capital M SNT, and by the property of the convolution of moment generating function implies that for a sample sum which is Sn is equal to x1 plus x2 plus x3 to xn, the moment generating function can be written as mxt to the power n. Similarly, we can write the moment generating function for the standardized sum also. We just simply plug in the values and you get this expression 5. Now let's try to simplify this thing a bit. So first thing is that we can simplify things a little bit by assuming that the mean mu is 0. That is, let's say if y is equal to x minus mu, then the mean of y is 0. We can always make such a transformation so that we can make the mean of y to be 0. Then y has the same standard deviation as x, and x and y would have the same standardized sum. So if the central limit theorem holds for distributions y with mean mu 0, then it also holds for distribution with any mean mu. Similarly, we can simplify things a little bit more by assuming that the standard deviation is 1. That is, if we can make a transformation like y is equal to x minus mu by sigma, where now our mu is 0, so y is equal to x by sigma, then the mean of y is 0 and its standard deviation is 1. And x and y will still have the same standardized sum. Okay, so then with these assumptions, we can write the moment generating function of the standardized sum as mx t by root over n to the power n. Here our sigma is 1, so now we don't see sigma in the expression 6. Now let's try to expand mxt. Okay, so we know that what is mxt? It is expectation value of e to the power tx, and which we can expand as 1 plus half e x square, expectation value of x square t square plus other higher order terms which you are absorbing in RT cube. So mainly capital R times t cube includes the remainder terms of the power series, and we know that for this thing e x square would be mu 2, which would be 1. So we can write mx t by sigma root over n as 1 plus half t by sigma root over n square plus higher order terms. Now sigma is 1, so mx t by root over n would be 1 plus t square by tn plus r prime. Okay, so the remainder terms, okay, which we have absorbed here would be, the contribution would be very small as n tends to infinity, so we can ignore those terms r prime, and we can see that as n tends to infinity, we can see that the form of the moment generating function of the standardized sum approaches to e to the power t square by 2. So this is nothing but the moment generating function of a standard normal distribution. Hence Sn star approaches the standard normal distribution. It's a very simpler way of seeing the central limit theorem by virtue of the usage of the moment generating function. And central limit theorem is the underlying reason why many of the random variables encountered in engineering and science are normally distributed. The observed variable of the results from a series of underlying disturbances that act together creates a central limit effect. Hence, many a times in science and engineering, we see this bell-shaped curve appearing more often. Now the next question is that when is the sample size large enough so that the central limit theorem can be assumed to apply? And the answer depends upon how close the underlying distribution is to the normal. If the underlying distribution is symmetric and let's say unimodal, not too far from a normal distribution, then the central limit theorem will apply for small values of n, like let's say around 7 or 8. If your sample size is around 7 or 8, you will start seeing that Gaussian nature of the curve. Now if the sample population is very non-normal, then larger samples will be required. So as a general guideline, if your sample size is greater than 30, the central limit theorem will almost always apply. There are exceptions to this guideline, but they are relatively rare. And there are also distributions like the Lorentzian function, which do not have a moment generating function. In those cases, the central limit theorem also doesn't apply to some distribution, and one of them is your Lorentzian function. And in most of the cases, this guideline of sample size greater than 30 is very conservative, and the central limit theorem will apply for sample sizes much lesser than 30 also, provided that the distribution, the shape of the distribution is closer to a normal distribution. Now, how to use the central limit theorem? I mean, there are certain steps which we normally implement while solving certain let's say questions. So the idea would be you write the random variable of interest first, choose your x as the sum of n independently and identically distributed random variables xi's. So your x should be x1 plus x2 plus xn. You can also write in form of sample mean, x bar also. I have not shown here, but you can always do that. You just have to scale by a constant, which is your n. Then you find the expectation value of this x, both the mean and the variance. And expectation, since they come from the same population, expectation value is n times mu for the sum, and the variance is n times sigma square. Okay, now according to central limit, and these are independent, so you can, therefore the variance is n times sigma square. Now according to central limit theorem, now standardize this sum. Okay, so x minus expectation value of x scaled by the standard deviation is approximately a standard normal random variable. We always do that because we know that it's very easy to compute probabilities and everything using a standard normal distribution. So then it's very easy to calculate probabilities using the central limit theorem and using the properties of standard normal variable. So these are the normal steps what we use to use central limit theorem. Let's do a small example and then things will become more clear. So a certain population has a mean body weight of 100 pounds and a standard deviation of 10 pounds. So the mean is given and the standard deviation is also given. So the distribution of weight is normal. So it's from a normal population. Find the probability that a random sample of n is equal to 25 persons will have an average weight less than 95 pounds. So it's very easy. So mu is given. So if you do the sampling distribution, you know that the mu of the sampling distribution is equal to the population mean. So it is 100, and the standard deviation is sigma by root over n, which comes out to be 2. So now you can create your standardized statistics, your z statistics, which is 95 minus 100 by 2, which is minus 2.5. So the probability of sample mean less than 95 is similar to your probability of z less than minus 2.5, which is nothing but your 5 minus 2.5, which is the CDF of a standard normal distribution. So this is how you have to calculate the probabilities. Now in the previous example, we dealt with a normal population, so obviously the central limit theorem holds. Here we'll take a population which is not normal. So in a data transmission system, each data packet consists of 1000 bits. Now each bit may be received in error with probability 0.1, and there's a 90% probability that the bit is non-erroneous. Find the probability then more than 130 errors in a certain data packet if the errors occur independently. Okay, so the each bit can be now treated as a Bernoulli random variable. See, it's a major departure from your normal distribution. with probability p is equal to 0.1. Here our success is like detecting a bit with error. So x is equal to 0 would be if the bit is non-erroneous, and xi will be 1 if the bit is in error, and the probability that the bit is in error is 0.1. So the total number of bit errors in each data packet is sum of all the Bernoulli random variables. So now this first step is you find the expectation value, it is 0.1. We know that the expectation value of a Bernoulli random variable is p, and the variance is 1 minus p. So using central limit theorem, t greater than 130 is, you make a standardized sum and you calculate the values. Okay, now there is something called continuity corrections which are implemented for discrete random variables. Okay, so let x1, x2, xn be independent discrete random variables, and let the sum be defined by x1 plus x2 to xn. So if you are interested in finding the probability of a lying between this probability using the central limit theorem, where now since these are discrete random variables, many a times a and b are integers. So since x is an integer valued random variable and you are using a central limit theorem which approximate to your continuous random variable, because your standard normal random variable is a continuous random variable. So now what it is done is that normally you deduct 0.5 from the lower limit and you add 0.5 to the upper limit. This is called the continuity correction, and it is particularly useful when your xi's are Bernoulli random variables, or when you calculate probability or use central limit theorem in case of, let's say, binomial random variables. Okay, this is just the continuity corrections, and after implementing these corrections, normally the probability calculation is very close to that of a standard normal variable. The approximation is much better. Similarly, we can use central limit theorem for studying the differences in two means when we want to compare two methods or two type of data processes and all that. Now supposedly we have two independent populations, say population 1 and 2, with different means mu1 and mu2 and different let's say variances, sigma 1 square and sigma 2 square. It should be sigma 1 square and sigma 2 square. I have written sigma 1 and sigma 2 respectively, and if you draw samples from these populations, so and let your x1 bar and x2 bar be your sample mean of sizes n1 and n2. So the sample sizes are also different. So then the sampling distribution of differences of means. Okay, so normally we try to, if we want to compare things, which one is better and all that, normally we take differences of means, and you'll see many applications in subsequent lectures. So that would also follow a, by virtue of central limit theorem, a standard normal variable, provided you standardize the difference of the two sample means. So you subtract mu1 minus mu2, which is the difference in the total for the population means, and then you scale it with the variance, standard deviation of the let's say of the difference of two means. So if the two populations are normal, then z is exactly standard normal. If they are not normal, and if you draw a considerably large sample size, then you will see that z would be approximately standard normal. Now let's take an example to understand this. The lifetime of a component used in some locomotive engine is a normal random variable with mean 5000 hours and standard deviation 40 hours. So an improvisation in the manufacturing process for this component increases the mean life to 5050 hours with a standard deviation of 30 hours. Now let's draw two samples, 16 from the first type of process and 25 from the second type of process. Now you have to estimate what is the probability that the difference in the two sample means is at least 25 hours. Okay, so here we want to compare two different processes, and we select, we use the statistic as the difference of the sample means. If the difference is quite significant, then we can make a decision of selecting a second process over the first one. And if we see that the difference is not very significant, then we can try to stay with the same process, or we can jump over to the second one because the standard deviation is less, provided that the cost involved is not more. So a lot of things are taken into account while decision making. So then we just calculate the sample mean, which is equal to the population mean and the sample standard deviation, and then use the standardized differences to calculate the probabilities. Now let's come to the sample variance. This shows the dispersion in the data. This is another sample statistic which is very important. As we have mentioned before, that sample mean is a central tendency locator, while sample standard deviation on variance tells us about the variation in data. Okay, so this is another important statistic, and it is also important to know that how the distribution of sample variance looks like. What distribution? Like for the case of sample mean, we know that it approaches a normal distribution if you select from a non-normal population but with a considerable large sample size. So here in this slide we can see that if we find the expectation value of the sample statistic, it comes out to be your population variance. So you will just follow these easy steps to see that the expected value of the sample variance is actually the population variance. And this appears to be true. I mean, this is true when you define your sample variance like the square of the deviation and you scale it by n minus 1, not n. If you remember, when we first discussed about sample variance, we talked about that when we calculate population variance, we divide it by n, by the total number of elements in that population, but while drawing or calculating the sample variance, we divide it by n minus 1, and we do it because by this process also we can see that the expectation value of the sample variance is equal to the population variance. Now there's a very important theorem, like if you draw a sample from a normal population having mean mu and variance sigma square of size n, then x bar, which is the sample mean, and s square, which is the sample variance, these two statistics, which are also random variables, are independent random variables, with x bar being a normal with mu and variance sigma square by n. This is, we have already seen that, and n minus 1 times s square by sigma square being a chi-square random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. So this is very important theorem. Here you see that we have already seen that the distribution of sample mean is a normal distribution. If you select it from a normal population whose mean is equal to the mean of the population, while its variance is sigma square by n. So as you increase the size of the random sample, your variance decreases. Okay, this is also, it is mentioned in this slide, the expectation value of sample mean, the variance of the sample mean, and you know that you can always convert into a standard normal variable by doing x bar minus mu and scaling it by the sample standard deviation. It also says that n minus 1 times s square by sigma square is a chi-square random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. So the distribution of sample variance follows a chi-square distribution. Now let's see. So now let's define that you are selecting x1, x2, xn from a normal population with mu and variance sigma square. So you can write xi minus x bar whole square as xi minus mu whole square minus n times x bar minus mu whole square. This is something which is very easy to see, and you can write xi minus x bar, the square of your deviation, sum of the square of the deviations, and you just can manipulate a bit to write the line which appears as the second line of the entire derivation. And if you just scale all the three terms by the variance, population variance, you will get left hand side, you can express the left hand side as sum of two terms. Now let's concentrate on these two terms. You can always write the term on the left hand side as sum of square of xi minus mu by sigma. But you know that xi minus mu by sigma is nothing but a standard normal random variable, right? And it is square. So it is actually a sum of square of standard normal variables, and there are n terms. So you can tell that it is a chi-square random variable with n degrees of freedom. Now let us concentrate on the right hand side. So if you concentrate on the second term of right hand side, which is actually x bar, which is the sample mean minus mu by sigma by root over n, and we know that this also is a standard normal variable and square. Okay, so it's only a single term, so it's actually a chi-square random variable with 1 degree of freedom. But if you remember, when we discussed about chi-square random variable, we have established that the sum of two independent chi-square random variables is also a chi-square random variable with a degree of freedom equal to the sum of the two degrees of freedom. Thus, it would seem that there is a reasonable possibility that the two terms on the right hand side of the equation are independent, where the first term on the right hand side is a chi-square random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom, because the left hand side is a chi-square random variable with n degrees of freedom, and on right hand side we have two terms. Oh, it's sum of two terms, and one of them is a chi-square random variable with 1 degree of freedom. So the first term is a chi-square random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom, and the numerator of the first term can be written as n minus 1 times the sample variance. So therefore n minus 1 times sample variance by sigma square is a chi-square random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. So therefore we have seen that if x1, x2, xn is a sample from a normal population having mean mu and variance sigma square, then sample mean and sample variance are independent random variables, with sample mean being normal with mean mu and variance sigma square by n, while n minus 1 times sample variance by population variance is a chi-square random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. This not only provides the distributions of sample mean and sample variance for a normal population, but also establishes the important fact that they are independent. And it turns out that this independence of sample mean and sample variance is a unique property of the normal distribution. And you will see how we'll use them or exploit them in subsequent lectures when we discuss more about inferential statistics. Now from this theorem we can also have another corollary, like if let x1, x2 and xn be a sample from a normal population with mean mu, and if x bar denotes the sample mean and s denotes the sample standard deviation, then root over n times x bar minus mu by sample standard deviation is a t random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. So we know that a t random variable with n degrees of freedom has the following form. If you remember, we discussed that t random variable is a ratio of a standard normal random variable and root over chi-square random variable by n degrees of freedom. That's how we got the t distribution with n degrees of freedom, and this degrees of freedom is equivalent to the degrees of freedom what we have in the denominator of a chi-square random variable. So we know that x bar minus mu by sigma by root over is a standard normal variable, so if you can put that in the numerator, and you also know that n minus 1 times s square by sigma square is a chi-square random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. So just to substitute them, and you can see that root over n times x bar minus mu by sample standard deviation is a t random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. This is important because we'll use them quite a lot when we talk about parameter estimation in subsequent lectures. Okay. Now let's discuss about sampling from a finite population. Now consider a population of n elements and suppose that P is the proportion of the population that has a certain characteristic which is of interest. Like you want to study a proportion of population suffering certain disease or favoring a certain candidate in an election procedure or favoring a certain type of, let's say, food, clothing, whatever. Okay. So then you can say that n times p elements have this characteristic, while the rest, which is n times 1 minus p, do not have that whatever characteristic of interest. Now if you draw a sample of size n from this population, that sample would be called a random sample if it's chosen in such a manner that each of the NCN population subsets of size n is equally likely to be the sample. Okay, so a random subset can be chosen sequentially by letting its first element to be equally likely to any of the n elements of the population and letting its second, third, all those elements to be equally likely to be any of the remaining n1 elements of the population, and so on. So you can decide it to be sort of a Bernoulli random variable such that xi is 1 if the member of the sample has that particular characteristic, and it is 0 if it doesn't have. Now let us consider now the sum. So let's x is equal to x1 plus x2 dot 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 xn. Because each term xi contributes 1 to the sum if the ith member of the sample has the characteristic and 0 otherwise, it follows that the sum, which is x, is equal to the number of members of the sample that possess the characteristic. Because if it is x1, x2 and n, if you have a random sample of size n, now x1, x2 would be 1 if they have that characteristic. Otherwise it would be 0 if they don't have, because your xi's are Bernoulli random variables. Then your sample mean is x by n, that sum over the random variables divided by n, and this would be nothing but the proportion of the members of the sample that possess the characteristic. Okay. Now let us consider the probabilities associated with these two statistics. So one is the sum of those random variables x, and another is your sample mean, which is your x bar, which would be equal to the proportion of the members of the sample that possess the characteristic. Now p xi is equal to 1 is n times p by n, which is p, and xi is equal to 0 is 1 minus p. This is something we know. However, the random variables, whatever you have chosen x1, x2, xn, are not independent. Now, if we do not know the outcome of the first selection, let's say, so then Px2 is equal to 1 is Np times by Np. Okay, which would be the proportion. Now, suppose you put the condition that you know the outcome that first selection has that characteristic. Then it more or less becomes like a conditional probability. Okay. So then your probability of x2 is 1 or will have that statistic would be then np minus 1 by n minus 1. Now if the first selection doesn't have that characteristic, then the probability that your second selection will have that would be np by n minus 1. Right. So that means knowing whether or not the first element of the random sample has the characteristic changes the probability for the next element. However, when the population size n is very large in relation to the sample size small n, this change will be very less. It will be very minimal. Okay, so it can be shown that when the population size n is large with respect to the sample size n, then these x1, x2, xn are approximately independent. They can be treated as independent random variables. Okay. Now, if we think each of these xi's as representing the result of a trial that is a success, like if xi is equal to 1 and a failure otherwise, it follows that the sum of these x1, x2, xi's can be thought to be as representing the total number of successes and trials, because all of these are Bernoulli random variables. Hence, if the xi's were independent, then your x would be nothing but a binomial random variable with parameters n and p. Remember, this will only happen if your capital N is considerably larger than your small n. Okay, then you can treat this xi's to be approximately independent, and since these are your Bernoulli random variables, you can treat the sum, which is your capital X, to be a binomial random variable with parameters n and p. So in other words, when the population size n is large in relation to the sample size, then the distribution of the number of members of the sample that possess the characteristic is approximately that of a binomial random variable with parameters n and p. So one can argue that it can also be hypogeometric random variable, because if we know a priori what is the first selection about, but we also know that a hypogeometric random variable can be approximated by a binomial random variable when the number chosen is small in relation to the total number of elements. So here we'll assume that the underlying population is large in relation to the sample size, and we'll take the distribution of x to be binomial. So if we do that, then the expectation value of x is n times p and the variance is n times np times 1 minus p. This is something which we already know. As we have discussed, that sample mean is nothing but the proportion of the sample that has the characteristic. So the expected value of sample mean is the proportion p, and the variance is p times 1 minus p by n. Okay. So now let's do a small example to understand this. Let 45% of the population has COVID-19 infection in a certain city. Okay. If a random sample of size 200 is chosen, find the expected value and standard deviation of the number of persons of the sample that has the infection, and find the probability that more than half the members of the sample has the infection. So here n is given 200. P is also given for the population, which is 0.45. So expected value is NP 90, and the standard deviation is square root of NP times 1 minus P. Okay, so this is something part 1 is done. Now coming to part 2, which is finding probability then half of the members has infection. So since your sample size is 200, we can use the central limit theorem here, and so that x minus mu by sigma would be a standard normal distribution. So here we have to find the probability of greater than half of the members. So here we'll use x greater than 101 and we can do the continuity corrections here. So, and use the central limit theorem to find the probability. Okay. So this is all about the sampling distributions. There are a lot other sample statistics barring your sample mean and sample variance. But most of the times we will be using these two statistics and their distributions to make some inference about the population parameters. And hence knowing that distribution is important, because once we know how the sampling distributions are, we can exploit them to compute probabilities and make an inference about a population. So in the upcoming lectures, we'll discuss about methods of estimating the parameters of the population using your sample. So we'll discuss in the next lecture about estimation of parameters. And we know that we say parameter when we deal with population and we use the term statistic when we deal with samples. So the next lectures will be about estimating the population parameters. Okay. Thank you very much.